Velayudhan Memorial Lecture conducted by the Dakshayani Velayudhan Center for Women's Studies under the Department of History, Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit. The center was formally inaugurated in March 2019 by none other than Ms. Radhika Vemula, Radhika Ma as she is fondly called, who traveled all the way from Andhra Pradesh to be with us and lead us in the path of imagining and practicing inclusion in educational institutions. The inauguration was followed by a seminar on building knowledges about Dalit lives. The center subsequently went ahead to organize a short-term course in Introduction to Gender Studies, was involved in a gender audit in colleges, and now there is a project from Center for Women's Development Studies on relocating and regrouping under the state experiences of affirmative policies in Ambedkar colonies. I'm indeed proud and happy to welcome this gathering today as we remember Dakshayani Velayudhan in her birth month, though not on her birthday. Dr. Maroona Murmu, professor at Jadavpur University, Kolkata, readily agreed to deliver this lecture, and I'm deeply indebted to her for this. I warmly welcome you to this gathering and look forward to hearing you. Warm welcome, Dr. Maroona. Dr. Meera Velayudhan is here too, and let me welcome you wholeheartedly to this gathering. My colleagues at the department, postgraduate students and researchers make every event a celebration of academic solidarity, and I warmly welcome them all to this lecture. There are friends and students and colleagues from other departments of the university as well. I warmly welcome them. They're well-wishers, friends, members of the public, always inspired by the legacy of Dakshayani Velayudhan, who are here to hear the presentation. Let me welcome all of you and invite you to take part in the discussions and make this event a memorable one. Warm welcome. Before we begin with Dr. Maroona, I would request Dr. Meera Velayudhan to speak a few words of felicitation. Meera?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Women's Studies Center and the department, the history department, and also I was really happy to have Maroona here because I think this center is very memorable for me also because I was there when Radhika Amma she sort of inaugurated the whole center, and it has a very different kind of meaning. To academics and to activism, it gives a very different direction. Also, you know, my field of work is also the same as Maroona's, the social reform periods and the what is called the Renaissance. And I studied Kerala, and this is a Bengal. These are all very. What is interesting is that these debates are now coming up in the present about what the past was like, you know, and what role did what was the kind of visions that were projected in those times through writings or to movements, through struggles, and particularly of women. And in the Kerala context, you know, it's very different from Bengal because the timings were totally different. Kerala, it was 1900 onwards to 1920s, 30s was the anti-caste and reform. Although the anti-caste movement really had its birth, notions of equality from the missionary period itself in Kerala, you know. And now it has come as how do you build a new Kerala, you know, what do you draw from the past? And so therefore this, your talk, I'm really looking forward to it because it also holds a lot of significance to the kind of discussion that is going on in Kerala also. So I'm happy that we'll have this today's talk by Maroona, and that Shiba is carrying forward some of these very crucial discussions that we need in our times. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Meera. Before I call upon Dr. Maroona, a brief introduction about her to the audience. Dr. Maroona Murmu is currently Professor of History at Jadavpur University. She received her MA, MPhil and PhD degrees from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. Her book, Words of Her Own, Women Authors in 19th-Century Bengal, has been published by Oxford University Press. She has a number of published articles on gender studies in colonial India and the caste question in Bengal in journals and edited books. Apart from anti-caste activism, she engages in environmental movements and is presently engaged in studying the condition of Adivasis in West Bengal and has worked on a project delving into inclusion of Adivasis in institutional education in the Hingalganj block of North 24 Parganas of West Bengal. Dr. Maroona Murmu, I invite you to make your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for this generous welcome, and it's an honor to be delivering the first Dakshayani Velayudhan lecture this year on the occasion of our 109th birth anniversary. And I thank the Dakshayani Velayudhan Center for Women's Studies, and especially Professor Shiva of Sri Shankaracharya University of for inviting me for this occasion. Uh, and I was really thrilled to hear that Radhika Vemula was here for the opening of this ceremony. As I thought that I will begin with the words with Vemula and the powerful note that shook me, at least in West Bengal, we do not talk about caste question. There's a notion that 34 years of left rule in Bengal uh, has led to erosion of caste here, but it was only after the institutional murder of Rohit Vemula that I started to about my experience of growing up in Bengal and the sort of uh, structural and system violence that goes on. And those famous lines which shook me and took me into a different trajectory altogether from what I was working. The words of Rohit Vemula, where he said the value of a man was reduced to his immediate identity and possibility, to a vote, to a number, to a thing, never man treated as a mind. Now, as has been said, that I did my master's, MPhil, and PhD from ANU, and I've been trained like all Bengalis out here. I've been trained into semi-classical music for almost a decade and a half, more than that. So I wanted to work on the social history of an indigenous gharana in Bengal called uh, Bishnupur Gharana. Uh, and I wanted to show how, away from the patronage of the Mughal emperor, how this Gharana was flourishing under the local Raj, the Bishnupur Raj. But the chairperson of the center at JNU told me that being a tribal, you want to work on high culture, you're not even an insider. That was me, and I was young, I had just passed my master's, and then I thought, if I cannot work on something that I want to work on, let me work on the marginalized in Renaissance Bengal. So I took up working on the women writers in Renaissance Bengal, and today I would talk about the stratagems of survival that enabled women authors to negotiate the male-dominated literary arena during the Renaissance Bengal. Now, this period, if you see between 1850 to 1900, we find that about 300 books were authored by Hindu and Brahmin women, and officially these have been listed under categories of art, biography, drama, fiction, history, language, poetry, philosophy, religion, science, travel under the Bengal Library Catalogue of Books. During the same period, we find that there were periodicals which were devoted to women's issues and were edited by women themselves, and women even appeared as literary critiques in various journals. So, if one does a quantitative analysis of writing of women during this Renaissance period, one would see that women mostly wrote poetry, and that is followed by novels, dramas, didactic, and discursive essays. And I will deal with this, try to situate diverse feminine experiences and articulation in the wider endeavor to understand the larger context of the historical change in 19th century Bengal, which was much valorized as Bengal. So, what led to the emergence of the women authors as a distinct, continuous, and ever growing category for the first time in Renaissance Bengal? So, what were the socio cultural incentives behind the production and circulation of women authored texts? So, as you know, this is Renaissance Bengal is also the period when we find the the of the socio-cultural identity of the Bhadraloks and Bhadramalas, the gentle upper caste men and women in Bengal. Bengal was also the first seat of vernacular press, and we have the print culture beginning there. We also have the beginning of formal and institutional education from the mid 1850s, and we find women using this print culture as a potent medium of expression for their feelings. The fact that the development of vernacular prose structure without a strict grammatical controls instruction began in Bengal in the wake of print culture might have actually uh, encouraged educated women to write. Now, if we look at the actual press runs of books authored by women in this period, we find uh, it's ran into 1,000 to 2,000 copies. But some of the writers like Mankumari Boshu, whose Bangali Ramanatikeর গৃহধর্ম and Swarna Kumari Devi's Golpo Shalpo, they had a press run of 50,000, sorry, 5,000, which is an indication of leadership and market for texts written by women. And if one takes into account multiple editions and reprints as indicators authors' popularity, then we would see that during this period, Swarna Kumari Devi of the Tagore household and Girindra Kumar Mohidin Dashi, who was a very close friend of Swarna Kumari, they emerged as the most reputed women authors during the period. Now, a comparative list of a price list amongst men and women writers does not go on to prove that the price for books written by women were less than that of men. In fact, on various occasions, it was the women writers whose book costed more than the male writers. Uh, in this brief talk, I cannot talk about larger um, arenas. Where I've taken these three genres to show how women fitted into the project of conceiving the modern nation, how they uh, contributed to the discourse of nation making, as well as questioned the concept of nation making, because women not considered to be a equal partner in this project. So women, through discursive tracks, they were critical about the exploitative structures of power embedded in the hegemonic identity of Hindu domesticity. And I just take up two texts. One is Kailash Pashineo's Hindu Mohilaganer Hinavastha, or Miseries of Hindu Women, and Swarnamoy Gupta's Usha Tinta, অর্থাৎ আধুনিক আর্য মহিলার অবস্থা সম্বন্ধে কথা, that is thoughts at the break of dawn, a few words of the condition of modern Aryan women. Now, as the titles of these books suggest, the ideal nationalist household was overwhelmingly imagined to be a Bengali Hindu one. But what is of concern here is that these tracts do not deal with the idealized Bhadramohila existence or desirable domesticity that was constructed by the nationalist males. They were actually questioning this idealized space by contrasting the actual living conditions of women in the colonial patriarchal setup. Now, Kulish Vashini Devi, in this book, and I see this as a way of general introduction to all the books that were written by women in this period. They almost begin by apologizing for their forced assertion of identity in print and entered the public realm of print culture as a writing subject and talking of Hindu women as the textual object, they are apologetic about their breach of fundamental norms of feminine propriety that dictated the invisibility of women in public realm. So, perhaps as a defense mechanism for opening up the private life of women for public scrutiny, most of them categorically assert that it was some male member in the family who had compelled them to gain access to the male preserve of learning. Now, in the advertisement of this book, Kailash Vashini, she profusely thanks a certain Bama Sundari Devi uh, who had inspired her to break confinement and holding on to the ladle and spoon alone. So she talks of Bama Sundari Devi, who wrote the first distractive tract, which wrote on the superstitions existing in Bengal and ways of eradicating it. Now, this text was critical about women's illiteracy, unhygienic labor conditions, misogynistic childcare, evils of early marriage, colonial polygamy, deprivation of the child widows, Shastric injunctions against foreign travel, the caste rules which ostracized uh, the communities on various grounds. Uh, and Kailash Vashini, to normalize her capability to write, disclaims any merit in that. She, like most others, she represents herself as one who is feeble in knowledge, intelligence, and wealth, and has been manipulated by her husband. And she defends her efforts as a plaintive, expectant child's cry, trying to attract the attention of the learned men of the country to the plight of women. And she actually appeals to the sympathetic readers not to show displeasure towards what she's depicting, but to show compassion, making her endeavor a success. Now, she says that sufferings and deprivation of a girl child begin right at their birth, because they were devoid of education, and the male members were gripped by the fear of ill effects of education. And Kulishvashini Devi, she very protested against the evils of caste system, singling it out to be obstacle in the path of social happiness, economic prosperity, and political unity in the country. Uh, and regarding information about travel of Hindus to foreign countries, she observes, had there been no caste system, we would not have been suffering such a plight. We could have effortlessly wandered in the countries far and abroad, and having observed the customs and manners and usages and practices, we could have exercised our intelligent discernment. We could have broken the shackles of unfreedom. Had there been no caste pride, everybody in unison could have sought knowledge to achieve advancement. The malfunctioning of the marriage system would have been rectified. If everybody belonged to the same caste, the commensality rules would have been broken and friends have emanated. In this fashion, Bengal would have become a haven of happiness. Uh, now, Bhama Sundari Devi, who was an inspiration for Kailash Vaishni Devi, did total abolition of caste prejudice as she felt that it was the principal cause for decline of the notion. These women, they were not only questioning patriarchy, but they were also questioning the caste structure. One of the things that remain the central point of the writings of women in this period is the problem of loveless conjugality, vicious circle illiteracy, child marriage, colonial polygamy, and widowhood uh, that plagued Renaissance Bengal. And Kailash argues that as a result of incongruous matches, in the absence of conjugal love and domestic happiness, she writes, where no work can be executed without love, how can there be marital bliss out of lovelessness? Now, love is on the verge of extinction, country. True love in a married couple is rarely observed. The partners are uncaring towards each other's sentiment and unwilling to voice their own desires. How can women be expected to be devotedly attached to their husbands then? And she prescribes the age of marriage for boys to be 20 and for girls 13 or 14. Now, this recommended age of marriage is higher than even the age of consent bill, being 3 years later than this, 3 decades later than this book in 1892. And this actually frames the Sarda Act or Child Marriage Act of 1929. She is also concerned about colonial polygamy and the celibate widowhood, which actually was a form of thing as various selfless beings. Now, thinking about the other book, Swarnamohari Gupta's book, what we find that what is find interesting in this is that uh, Swarnamohi did not desire a future designed according to a modernizing project, which would entail protection of the colonial state to elevate India in the reckoning of the civilized nation. But what she went on saying through the text is that the progress and betterment could only through the initiative of the indigenous patriarchy following the lines of the Aryan ancestors. Both Chaudhary Kailash Vashini, they chose city as an arena for gaining access to freedom and from which they might speak and challenge the notions of patriarchy and nationalist reformers. Now we move on to autobiography, And we find that women, instead of creating a coherent, unified, agential subjectivity, they deliberately come across as fragmentary and disconnected individuals. Uh, Such a recreation of self, which lacks harmony and wholeness, is perhaps an attempt to disrupt the patriarchal discourse and to criticize the hierarchical social setup in Bengal. And we'll just talk about Kailasbashi Nimit Janoika Grihobadi's diary, or diary of a certain housewife, and Sharada Sundari Devi's Atmakatha. Now, these texts illustrate how historical conditions, material forces, cultural discourses, and ideological practices in Renaissance Bengal had helped them to constitute their subjectivities in relation to the male member as well as autonomous authorial selves. Uh, Now, both these individuals are actually related to families who had a huge role to play in the Renaissance Bengal. Kailash Bashini Mitra was married to Kishori Chand Mitra, who was a first district magistrate, Bengali district magistrate uh, in real times, and Sharada Sundari Devi happens to be the mother of the Brahmo reformer. Um, uh, I'll get back to the name. Now, what is distinct about Kailash Bashini's text is that she talks about the evolved companionship with her husband, and she somehow was able to rationalize the social restrictions fitting of a virtuous Hindu life, and accepted the limitedness of female solidarity and sisterhood that were forced upon women in 19th century Bengal. Now, she sees this loving relationship uh, came to a halt when Kishori Chand moved to Calcutta as the first Bengali junior magistrate, and he adapted the westernized lifestyle of young Bengal. Now, Kailash Bashini says that she symbolically followed the Hindu rituals without being convinced of its basic validity. And she said living in a social world that defined the women's identity in relational terms with family, clan, caste, community, uh, excommunication destabilized her very being. So she actually tried to follow the Hindu prescriptive life without having much belief in it. Interestingly, though a diary which is very candid and critical, we find that Kailash Bashini abruptly ends the narrative with the death of her husband and the beginning of her widowhood at the age of 43. It is as if the solace provided by the companionate marriage uh, gave her the reason to write about her life. And she, in the diary, had espoused widowhood as an embodiment of traditional virtues, but she could not bear the strain of it. And Having led a loving marital life under the shadow of her husband, she turned reticent about the 22 remaining years of her existence as a helpless Hindu widow. Now, to Sharada Sundari Devi, the mother of Chandra Sen, sorry, I missed that. Now, she dictated her autobiography uh, in 1892 to her grandson-in-law Jogendralal Khastagir. So Jogendralal Khastagir, he wanted to present a public image of Keshav Chandra Sen through the private acts of his mother Sharada Sundari. Now this is quite contrary to the narrative purpose of Sharada Sundari herself. Uh, Now, Yogendranath admits that the dictated biography to him is as sacred as a religious text written for the future followers of Navabidhan or the new dispensation that Keshav Chandra Sen had begun, and and he dedicates the book to the citizens of the country which Keshav Sen inhabited, especially the followers of Navabidhan of the coming years. But to Sharada Sundari, being the mother of Keshav Chandra Sen is one of the many roles that she played in her lives. And perhaps because of her disinterested in her family life, because of the way she was treated as a widow, uh, Keshav Chandra Sen is not the pivot of her mother's self imagining through the dictated autobiography. Uh, one one of the things which come across as very distinct uh, in the autobiography is how she understood the institution of marriage. Now, conventionally, the autobiographical self is introduced through patrilineal genealogy, family relations, intricacies of kinship network, affiliations of caste and clan. But Sharada Sundari divorced just a dozen of lives about her origin. Now, the relegation of the natal family and lineage to obscurity goes hand in hand with the social injunction that the women's real affection is not with the natal family, but with the matrimonial one. Uh, so the change of lineage through marriage and the custom of moving into a new family after marriage made female identities fluid, challenging their specific historical location. So, Sharda Sundari begins her reflection with her fears as a child bride and the anxiety faced because her mother-in-law did not like her, and she begins by saying, I used to think that I would be put into a jail or even hung when my father forcefully took me to my in-laws. I felt though I had been thrown into an ocean. After she lost her husband, Pyaramohan Shane, and she would occupy a very vulnerable position in the joint family, and she embraced pilgrimage to run away from the uh, hardships that she was pushed into. But she does talk about the violations regarding negotiations in the family when most of her decisions regarding the marriage of sons and daughters were rejected by the male members. Uh, while talking about the daughter of talking about the marriage of her youngest daughter, Panna, one finds that she notes with pride, since resources lay in the hands of my elder brother-in-law, the expenditure was handled by him, but I took partner. What is interesting is that Sharada Sundari even welcomed the marriage of her son Krishna Bihari Sen to a girl of lower clan, and she called this marriage a marriage of a new kind, a love marriage, and rose above the rigidities of Edward's considerations and stood by her son, saying that none of the daughters-in-law of this household is as beautiful as this one. Now, of course, the marriage of Maharani Srimati Devi to the 21st Maharaja of Court Bihar led to the crack in the Brahmo Samaj because pointed out that Srimati was below 14 and the Orthodox Hindu Maharaj 15, which actually contravened the Native Brahmo Marriage Act of 1872. Now, either out of a conscious subversive strategy for manipulation of facts or as an evasive mechanism against disagreeable memories, uh, Sharada Sundari refused to write further about the matrimony, saying that many have written about it. There is no need to repeat it. Uh, but she went on to say that though the formal marriage happened in 1878, the marriage was not consummated until Srimati was 16 years old. Now, unusual for her times, she was liberated from caste prejudices and the like who of censor for violating caste norms. A pilgrimage to Puri, the daughter of her Koibatto maid, who belonged to an intermediate lowly caste, came running to her as she was eating and joined her. Now, the Vaishnav guru of the same household who accompanied these women who had gone for pilgrimage refused to eat. But she points out that at the prospect of being left behind, he quickly ate the leftovers and forgot all his protestations about caste commensality rules. Moving on from the personal narratives, let's move on to the novels. Now, if you look at the early novelists, we would see that almost all female protagonists created by novelists were inmates of the poor. They were subject to multifarious sufferings, inequalities, and injustices that resulted out of child marriage, colonism, adultery, sexual excess of husbands, lovers, or due to widowhood. Uh, and we see that if they manage to escape usual patriarchal oppression, they inevitably fall prey to destiny and adverse situation. Uh, in most of the accounts, marginalized women face the same trajectory. They helplessly accept all deceit and deprivation, rationalize lives as glorified, chaste, and devoted wives, and they end up committing suicide, facing death, or embrace satitva, or lead a dissatisfied life. But what came as a welcome break was Kahake, written by Swarna Kumari Devi, who penned 11 novels and possessed a rare versatility of being a novelist, a poet, a playwright, an essayist, a songwriter, a journalist, and she happens to be the elder sister of Rabindranath Tagore. Now, in the novel Kahani, she, uh, with the protagonist Mrinalini, with disarming frankness, delineates a creed about love which is distinct from the societal paradigm of the unique, once in a lifetime relationship. She confesses that she loved even before her marriage without any thought of getting married to the person. And that was not her first love and last love, for she loved even prior to that. Her heart was never vacant. Only a daring female subject could spell out thus at a time when monogamous womanly love was projected as a source of womanly goodness. Now, Mrinalini goes on to say how she was very attached to the prefect in her school, Chottu, and she wondered why Chottu did not her while her father did. And this once again needed an enormous amount of strength of character to profess longing for a physical touch of a friend. Now, the childhood memories of Chottu uh, lived on with Mrinalini, but we find that in her youth, she meets Mr. Ramanath Ghosh, who a barrister. But she came to know that this man was engaged to somebody in England, and he had broken the relationship there. And we find Mrinalini protesting against societal moral double standard that overlooked promiscuity and deception by men, but severely chastised women for fidelity. Uh, and combating patriarchal desire for monopolistic claim over woman's love, she demanded fidelity from men. And she said that the man who is the object of my forgiveness can never be my husband. Just as a man desires eternal, untarnished purity from his wife, yearns everlasting devotion, I too want to possess his entire existence as mine. I can pardon him. I can even marry him if need be. He can enter the sanctuary of my being uh, uh, with reservation. And she says that will such a manly feeling in a woman be with compassion. Now, as the story goes, we find that in the end, the man whom her father chosen turns out to be the Chottu of childhood, and the past is recuperated in the present. And with an interrogative tone, she asks the reader, uh, did my heart get attracted to the new, finding the semblance of the old in it? Or is it that being charmed by the new, I have attained the old? To whom have I bestowed my love? And therein comes the title of the novel, Kahake, to whom? What is significant about Kahake is that in a decisive novelistic moment, we find a comparison being made between George Eliot and William Shakespeare. Now, one ought not, and this seems to be a forced discussion in the novel. Now, one ought not look for exact parallels between life and work, but Swarnakumari herself had comparison with her younger brother Rabindranath Tagore. As an author, her brilliance was weighed against higher male standard. And in 1913, soon after Kahake was translated and published by her as unfinished song, Rabindranath wrote a letter to William Rothenstein who was the publisher of this novel. And he wrote, is one of the most unfortunate beings who has more ambition than has ability, just enough talent to keep her alive for a short period. Her weakness has been taken advantage of some unscrupulous literary agents in London, and she has had stories translated and published. I have given no encouragement, but have not been successful in making her see things in proper light. Now, this is Rabindranath Tagore, who is considered to be a progressive man, being friendly about issues concerning women. And this jealousy by Rabindranath, heart wrenching, keeping in mind that Swarnakumari Devi dedicated her first book of poems, Gatha, to her younger sibling. Now, I will end by looking into the critical evaluation of women texts and diverse patterns of consumption uh, to understand uh, reception of women's text in Renaissance Bengal. Now, Swarnakumari Devi wrote her first novel, Deep Nirvan, on this mothered lamb incognito. And as an editorial critique, Ashit Kumar Bandhopadhyay, during the 125th birth anniversary of Rabindranath Tagore, observes about Swarnakumari Devi, this one novelist is easily comparable with any male novelist of a time in her narrative technique and creations of character. However, her novels are rather virile and devoid of soft feminine touch. So, a woman author's creative imagination was to be harnessed to display womanly qualities. And Mirror, an organ of the Bharat Brahma Samaj, it reviewed another text by Swarnakumari Devi called Chinnamukul, or the Lipped Bard. And once again, we should look into the terms of the review. It says this type, as is characteristics of this writer, chaste, clear, sweet, and vigorous, insists of such grand women heroism and abnegation of self, liberate the fancy and gladden the heart. So, one cannot overlook the underlying necessity to confirm to the assumption of women as reservoirs of true values, lady with the lamp disseminating sweetness and light. Uh, and she had to display womanly qualities even through her writings. Um, Now, Torongini Dashi, she wrote a book called Nishfal or a Barren Tree in 1877. And then I'll read a bit of the review that came out in Calcutta Review. And it reads, we are sorry to say that we have not found much in our work which a woman alone could have given us. Srimati Torongini does not seem to speak from her heart. It is not a woman's language and is knowing. We fear to the biggest fascination exercised over youthful minds by a style of writing which now then offends our taste in the pages of excellent periodical Bongodarshan. Srimati Torongini is really a promising writer and success is sure to crown her literary efforts if she only throws away all meretricious models of style set by persons who do not belong to her sex and seek a style in her own true woman's heart. Now, I'll end by reading out a review in Bongo Darshan, which was known for its extremely high and exacting standards of book review. And this was edited by none other than Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay, the doyen of Bengali novel writing, nationalist novel writing. And here he does a review of Mukhodaini Mukhopadhyay's book of poem called Bonoproshun. In this, Mukhodaini was sarcastic towards the emancipated Bengali Babas who were vainglorious, slavish, and depraved. And the review of this book runs thus. Despite the use of surname Mukhopadhyay, readers must have understood that this work is not written by any Mr. Mukherjee, but Srimati Mukhodaini Devi. The epithet of Devi, which pleases goddess Shochi, Saraswati, and Lakshmi, gives Srimati Mukhopadhyay discontent. Abstain from entering into an altercation. We do not intend to be a match for women in that field. I am always afraid to praise poetic composition by women, since it might instigate our women to desert their household duties and pick up the pen. I hope Srimati Mukhopadhyay will condone me if I am not overgenerous in her work. Her poem, Bangalir Babu, has been published with some deletion. Hope the author would forgive such audacity. Now, such sarcastic comments and caustic critiques by the doyens of Renaissance Bengal could not strip women authors of their foray. Whatever be their contemporary activity, it was their negotiation with hegemonic discourses on literary worth, redeployment of traditional values, and experimentation with modern possibilities that allow women authors of present times to write the history of contemplation that was there in Renaissance Bengal. Discounting the sneering critical chorus again, it was the resistance, subversion, and even compromises of these literary foremothers that women authors today proudly claim as a powerful and complex inheritance. And I would end here. Well, thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Dr. Maroona. That was very lovely. So much of information, especially for the non-Bengali audience. That was wonderful. Before we start taking questions, I just have a comment. The comment is that what we from outside Bengal get to hear is about Amar Jeevan, Rashasundari Devi and Amar Jeevan. But much more than, just one person. You've brought up a whole range of writing, a whole lot of personalities that you've foregrounded. My one question would be, there is a tension involved in the act of writing itself, especially in Renaissance period. Women are starting to write. So there is a tension in, in the act of writing as a public sphere activity, moving outside from your domain and moving out into the public sphere. What are these tensions that, of course, there are sarcastic remarks, there are a lot of critiques that are coming in, but what are the tensions that, women are, negotiating with, this inside outside tensions? What is your comment on that?
Yeah, most of the writers, what they assert is that they have taken to writing only after they've done their household duty. So writing happens at night, uh, during leisure hours, which are which is a entitlement which women do not get. So it's like, and they keep on asserting that it's the men who have encouraged them. Their writing is not of much literary worth, but men should be generous towards writing women. So it's like there's always a voice of diffidence in the writings. The women might go on to uh, critique patriarchal endeavors to suppress women, women, but in order to create some sort of a balance, in order to be generally acceptable to the society so that they can at least go on writing, we find that the women treaded a middle ground. While they accepted certain traditional expectations formulated by the nationalist patriarchy, they at the same time are critical to the extent that they could go about doing. So there was a very exquisite balance that they were trying to create through their writings.
Yeah, thank you. I've heard that Tagore writes a forward to Rasasundari Devi saying that, there's nothing to fear, that women get educated and they'll leave the kitchen astray. They are managing both wonderfully, so let's be calm about it. I've heard this. So this anxiety was forever there, I guess.
Yeah, because Tagore went into an altercation with Ramabai Ranade on various spheres of work and how women should confine themselves to the domestic arena. So, whatever his protestations and feminist overtures that we find in his writing, but in personal life, he wasn't very encouraging towards women who wrote, actually. So
Yeah.
there's also always a gap between what on the public image and what they practice in real life. So Tagore might be a Renaissance man, but he was no different, actually.
You're right. You're right. Thank you. There's a question in the chat box. Shall I read it to you?
Yeah, please.
This is Debushmita Deb. How do we read contemporary women writing in Bengal in the light of the history of women writing?
Yeah. One very distinctive thing that I like to point out about Bengal is that in Bengal, uh, with the we I don't know how much people know about it, but there was institutional right, like Rohit Vemula, there was institutional killing of Chuni Kotal, who was the first women graduate belonging to Lodha Shawar community, who were during colonial times called criminal tribes. Now, she was doing her master's in anthropology from Vidyasagar University in Midnapur, and it so happened that the anthropology professor there went on taunting her through lectures, through seminars, saying that she belonged to a criminal tribe. And it so happened that she did take her course taking her life on August 1992. And right after that, Dalit Sahitya Sangstha was created. And here, while it was mostly an endeavor of men, we do find a lot of women who were a part of it. And we know that Baby Haldar, she's the first woman autobiography, Dalit woman autobiographer The second Dalit woman autobiographer is Kolani Thakur. And what is interesting about Kolani Thakur is that um, she runs a journal called Neer Ritupatro, and it's almost into its 28th year, where she in the last few years, other initially it was open to others as well, but in the last few years, uh, this publishes writings by women, Dalit authors, Muslim authors, uh, mm, Adivasi authors who are considered to be uh, who the marginal others in Bengal, because there was a contention that there could be no Dalit writing. What is so specific about Dalit writing? Its writers generally should be used, but there was an assertion, and this much to the efforts of these mm, the fightings or the struggles led by the members of Holy Chaitya Academy, that we find that last year there was the foundation of Dalit Sahitya Academy in Bengal, established by the West Bengal government, and Kalyani Thakur and others. There are other women Dalit writers who are part of this Dalit which has been formed. So there might be like it's women authors and marginal others. They are still considered marginal others in Bengal, but they have started asserting themselves. So we have to, whatever be the scenario, I don't think things are very hopeful, because I think people know what last year, the caste revolution that went on. So there might be a lot of uh, resistance to the sort of assertion that uh, women like us are trying to do, but the government had to take recognition of our of the resistance that is going on. So I think that's silver lining to the entire scenario.
Thank you. There, I don't find any other questions. I think also because the Bengali literature is still new.
Yeah,
The
yeah,
way that you
absolutely.
talked about is still new to the Malayali audience. But that was very interesting. Meera, do you want to engage? Meera? Meera, are you there?
Just 1 second. Yeah. No, no. I mean, this was really a very such a enriching presentation, because we didn't know there were these women writers who were actually also critiquing, say, caste, you know, and also, sort of breaking many in that sense through their writings barriers, and I think that that is very significant, because even the it's very complex also. Even the Kerala women writing from 1900 to 1930s also was very, there was different kind of trends and negotiating with different movements and ideas. So like yours, it is a very much more, comes out as a very much more complex kind of engagement and sort of assertions. And I really thank you for this.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Meera. If there are no more questions, I think we can end the session. I would invite Blessing Joseph, Research Scholar of the department, to propose the vote of thanks. Blessing. Thank you, Blessing, for winding up the session. Thank you so much, Dr. Maroona. It's been such an honor to have you here.
Same here. The honor of being able to present the first Dakshayani Velayudhan lecture. It's really a great
Yes,
honor.
yes. Very happy and proud. Thanks, Meera. As
Yeah,
usual, being around. Always.
yes, always around. And now,
Yes.
Maruna, we should interact